Welcome to my new podcast where I'll be having weekly conversations about AI in law with legal professionals. I'm especially excited about today's guest. We're joined by Emma Kelly, who spent nearly 2 decades across different parts of the legal space, and today she's helping the industry think clearly about AI. Hey Emma, thanks for doing this again. The first one went a bit wrong. I forgot to hit record. But in this redo, if you could give us a few sentences about your journey, please.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rock. And no worries. It's my pleasure to get the opportunity to speak with you again. Yeah, so my journey has been a lot of twists and turns. So I've been in the legal industry for almost 20 years at this point. I started off my career as a law librarian at an AmLaw 25 firm. So for about 5 years, and then I moved on to a media company where I helped launch their antitrust product, and I worked in editorial and product development. From there, I moved into business development. I worked at a GovTech startup. I worked in eDiscovery, translations, managed review, and business development for a large business services company. I've worked at a voice AI startup and a boutique e-discovery company. So I've been around the industry for a very long time. At this point, I have my own shingle out. I have my consultancy Quad K, where I work with early stage legal tech companies on go to market, and then also working on evaluations with the Symbio framework. So I have a lot of different things, a lot of irons in the fire, so to speak.
And when in your journey did you start meeting AI? Was it more in eDiscovery or was it even before that?
Yeah, so I would say there was some AI involved in the GovTech startup I was in, but it was really when I got involved in eDiscovery that I really got involved in AI. AI has been in eDiscovery for years and years, probably at least since 2010 when technology assisted review came out. So that isn't generative AI, that's machine learning, continuous active learning. So really getting a familiarity and getting comfortable with it, getting comfortable with machine translation, which at the time wasn't using generative AI, but using different types of AI. So this new generative AI push and movement is very interesting to me, having seen the progression of AI in legal. Because before a lot of attorneys didn't really trust it.
Yeah.
Getting an attorney to use like technology assisted review sometimes, even though it's machine learning, even though you're training the subject matter expert, the lawyer themselves is training it, getting them to trust it sometimes took a lot of hand holding, where it's very interesting now with LLMs, generative AI, people are ready to just jump right into it. So
That's
very
very interesting.
fascinating.
That part that they're very willing to jump into Gen AI part. And then I wanted to ask you, because you started with AI when machine learning was the thing. And there
Yes.
you saw how those systems basically gave some sort of output that you guys also evaluated, right? And then when you see the adoption being, not so quick, let's say, with machine learning, although it was much easier to evaluate than today's Gen AI, how do you see this? Do you see the logic behind, people jumping into Gen AI much faster now?
Yeah, it's fascinating because with machine learning, a lot of the times the hand-holding have to explain to people that you have machine learning in your life in a lot of different ways. If you use Spotify, if you use Netflix, there's a lot of predictive analytics involved in web search, things like that, telling people like you use this. And then, as you said, it's much easier to evaluate. So, for instance, with eDiscovery, looking at precision and recall, you can look at that, you can evaluate that very easily with machine learning. Versus, as you were saying, with generative AI, and that's one of the reasons I kind of got into evaluation. There's not a lot of really good standard ways of looking at evaluation and evaluating LLMs and LLM outputs. So I think a lot of the reason that people are more willing to do things with LLMs is psychological in a way. So a lot of it's marketing. So they're familiar with chatbots. I think since, Chat GPT, 3.5 came out, people kind of look at it as almost this magic box, right? Like I can put in my prompt, I get an answer. And because it is using language, it has this aura authority, right? Where it's like, oh, of course, it sounds like it's right. It looks like it's right. I'm going to assume it's right. And so people are just much more willing to use it, which is interesting. When I don't always think some of the use cases people are using LLMs for is always the best use case.
Mm.
Like, for instance, machine learning is still a thing. We could still use machine learning, guys.
We can. And even before we go into machine learning, we can still use predeterministic workflows, like take this document and put it
Exactly.
in this folder. Like we're still there that we can benefit a lot from here. Um,
Exactly. And they can work together, right? So
yeah,
I do think like LLMs, the non-deterministic nature of LLMs can be very, very useful for legal work and very useful for other use cases and other back office functions, for instance, right? Not necessarily for legal work directly, but for the process of running a law firm or providing legal services. But so is machine learning, and so are other automation tools. So
yeah,
it's very interesting too, because a lot of times, and I had this conversation with somebody else recently. For instance, I just went to this large legal technology conference, ILTA,
mhm,
and people I were talking to, and then talking to some of the booth vendors, they were telling me as well that a lot of people were just coming and saying they're just interested in AI.
yeah,
Their mandate is to go out and find out about AI. How can I use AI? What are you using AI for? And it's almost that they just want to buy an AI product and not
yeah,
necessarily looking for a problem they're solving with AI.
yeah, yeah. But that's very interesting. And do you see that more in big law, or is it more? Yeah, is it
I, yeah, that's interesting. So I think it's easier to evaluate Big Law because it's smaller in some ways, right? So you
okay?
have the AmLaw 200, um, you have the Vault 500, right? You have a certain number of law firms, and they do act similarly, right? Because they're going after similar size clients. And so I think you see a lot of that there, right? Like we have to use AI, we have to use AI because their clients are also using AI, right? You see that in the
Yeah,
Fortune 500 where they also have the mandates like, hey, we have to use AI, not really knowing what that looks like. They just know they can use AI or they think they can use AI and then somehow that's going to make them more efficient. It's kind of like AI something something profit.
yeah,
So you see that a lot in big law. And I think because the mid market and small law is so disparate and fractured, it depends on the firm. So some firms I've spoken to in who are smaller or mid-sized, they're not doing any AI right now. They block everything and they're like, okay, we got to figure out an AI policy before we could do anything. But there's no rush to implement or
yeah,
find an AI policy.
yeah,
So there's some of that. And then others are saying like, okay, I'm going to figure out like how I could become like an AI augmented law firm. And to be honest, I don't know how many firms are actually doing that. There's a lot of talk about doing that. There's other people who whose business is setting up and helping law firms do that. But yeah, it's very
that's very
interesting, kind of the fragmentation at the lower end of the market, which
yeah,
is, I think, larger in size
yeah,
than the top of the market, where they're also saying like AI, AI. Even friends of mine at consultancies and ALSP, alternative legal service providers, they're finding the same things as well, right? Where their
okay.
mandate is like, all right, go find out about AI, or clients want AI.
Yeah, but that's very interesting. And then when you were working with machine learning projects back in the days, you understood that every project starts with the data and with the foundation, with building the foundation, right?
Yes.
So now Big
Yes.
Law, I think, has most experiences with machine learning because those projects were just so expensive back in the days that I think only deep
Yes.
pockets could afford them, right? So now coming from an environment where, from a history of you already using this technology, and now nothing changed. It's just a different nature of AI. So the
Hmm.
data still needs to be cleaned. The foundation still needs to be there. The processes need to be there, right? So where
Yes.
do you see the disconnect here between Is it all that marketing and all that hype that's being thrown at our faces that makes us forget about this?
I think so. I think to a degree, right? So I'll give the example of Copilot, right? Like Copilot in theory should be amazing, right?
Yeah.
Like you have AI connected to your systems, to your SharePoint, your OneDrive, your email, all of your documents. You should be able to have this powerful, powerful tool. But if you talk to anyone who uses Copilot, it's not very helpful if you want to, surface up some emails you found, you have, right? And you're looking for them. It's not helpful necessarily for finding all of the information, the data you have. So it's not necessarily as helpful
Yeah.
as in theory it should be, right? With
It's a
this
nice
idea,
gimmick.
this promise of generative AI, and it's connected to your data already.
Yeah.
So there's, I think, still a huge disconnect between how the data needs to be organized and connected and how it can actually be helpful and how to actually use these LLMs to drive the results you want. And if it's the right way to do it. So it's very interesting. Like I gave the example of like finding email, right? So sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
all right, I need to find my correspondence with people from this company about this issue. And the LLM doesn't necessarily come up with everything because we all know we've worked in businesses where it's like, oh, I think I emailed that person 6 months ago. I don't remember their name. I don't know what keyword I'd necessarily use. Let me see if I can find it, do it this way. And you don't do it. And then you just play around with the search for 10 minutes and you find your email.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's keyword based, so you can kind of
Yeah.
remember which keywords used. But now
Remembering
those,
the keywords used, but that's even just a better way if you just have better with tagging, for instance, right? Like if you
yeah,
organize your inbox a certain way. Yeah, you make sure, okay, everything related to this issue with this client I put in here, or I tag it in this certain way. Just different ways of different data hygiene. You could get probably a better result than even using an LLM, but
yeah,
you're just using your data in a better way. But yeah,
yeah,
I
and
think you're right. Like it's the data organization, and with eDiscovery, it's different because you have data about a specific litigation, and that's the purpose of an eDiscovery platform.
mhm,
That's why you have the project manager. They're organizing the data for you. The platform's organizing it. You're doing a lot of keyword searches. You're calling a lot of data. You're doing the tagging, or you're having, in this case, a generative AI review, like doing tagging there. So you're having data organized for a discrete purpose, I think, versus these large organizations that their data isn't necessarily organized well because
yeah,
it's not just for one discrete project.
yeah,
And even these large law firms that have records departments that do a great job, but the records are just for specific cases,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
not connected. You have conflicts issues, you have privilege issues. You can't connect all of this data in a way I think people think that they could, right? It's
yeah,
not connected, it's not organized well. And that's just on the law firm level. I mean, on a corporate level, corporations, they have different needs. They don't have privilege issues or conflict issues. Their data is not organized well. And that's
yeah,
something you find in eDiscovery a lot too, where you're trying to find the data for a specific litigation and you're wondering where that is, that information
yeah.
governance portion of it. But that's where then, theoretically you can have an LLM but it's not connected to any sort of company data, or it's connected to just a little bit of it, but it's not going to be produce any helpful insights for you.
That's true. And the more data you have, the more different folders you have. Let's say you have two folders with one topic scattered, LLM is going to be quite successful in kind of letting you talk to them. But if you multiply that by 100, the success probability also falls by 100. And the key
Yes.
takeaway that you said is that, and I've never thought of it that way, and that's a quite astute way of looking at it. So the platforms in legal tech that were organizing the data for a specific purpose, either building workflows or enabling e-discovery later on in the future, or enabling contract life cycles. So managing contracts through life cycles. So those platforms already have your data organized in a way. So when they plug on top of that AI, they're going to be able to come up with much more high quality solutions than platforms that still have to assemble all of your data, because it doesn't really matter if, so yes, true, LLMs look at all that huge amount of data at the same time. But when they're going through files, they're also looking at file names, they're looking at file dates, they're looking at under which parent folder is this folder that
Yeah.
contains this file. So if your file is called 001, no matter how good your LLM is, it's not going to be able to really know that this file is important for this specific case that you're working on right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Exactly. And they're not going to know, or if you just have the client matter number, version 3, version 5, it's not really, the LLM doesn't have the context then to determine that that file is relevant
True.
to your
When you have
case.
file V1, V2, V5, LLM doesn't know that V1 to V4 is not relevant
They're not
anymore.
relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Or,
true.
I mean, you see files, final version 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you find me a final version for this? And then it will check the how do you call that? Previous to last? No.
Yeah. The
Or
second
previous
to
to last?
last, previous to
Yeah.
last, but it's not
Yeah.
sure. It's like final,
Yeah.
final for real.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, very interesting. And how do you see, well, you said that those problems are quite visible in big law, but how do you view then, let's say, boutique firms and then even maybe solo practices? Being positioned in all this complexity.
Yeah, so I think in some ways, smaller firms and solos are really well positioned because they don't have as much data, right? But then on the flip side, they also don't have the infrastructure or staff maybe to organize the data in the way Big Law would. Right? They don't
Yeah.
have a large records department. They don't necessarily pay for infrastructure or information governance software to manage their practice. So in some ways, it might be easier because there's less data, and it's also they can move faster, so they can implement faster. So if they want to do some sort of AI solution, they can just move. But in other ways, they're not as well positioned because they don't know where any of their data is.
Yeah. And also they don't have time to educate themselves and what is the proper way of
Yeah.
handling all of that. Yeah.
I mean, in all
That's true.
fairness, Big Law doesn't, like, lawyers in Big Law don't necessarily do either, but they also are able to pay for the infrastructure to have somebody who does.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you see in-house teams fitting in all that? On which side of the spectrum are
Which one? The Big Law or
they?
small solos?
Small to medium size, not so much big law. In-house
Yeah.
teams is more like on the smaller spectrum.
I think that's tough because there's not a one size fit all for those types of firms, right? Like mid-market, boutique, small solos, they're all very different, which is good, right? Because you get more variety in the market, they have more flexibility. So I think it's very fractured, right? So you're going to have some that are going to go all in. You're going to have some that might do one or two projects here or there. And then you have some who are just going to say, I'm not dealing with this at all.
Yeah.
Because you do see, even in technology adoption in general, you see, especially in that part of the market, just a wide array of adoptions. So I'll keep going back to eDiscovery as an example. So I think it's, in our LinkedIn echo chamber and our, talking to other people, we think a lot of there's all these amazing innovations happening in legal tech, and there are, but it's not evenly distributed. So for instance, in eDiscovery, we have these great platforms that it's basically the accepted way to review these documents, make productions, things like that. But then you still have law firms who are looking through items just on PDFs or just, reviewing screenshots of their text messages. Doing a lot of things outside of best practices that if Big Law, if in some of these litigations, if they were to do it there, they'd get sanctioned. But they're doing it this way because they're like, oh, I don't want to pay for the technology. I don't need it. I just need to review a few things. It's not going to matter. And we forget that these types of firms that still do that, even in an area of law where there's been a lot of technological progress for a long time. So imagine, we see now with legal tech, all of this other really cool applications and things we could do with AI that I don't know if these firms are necessarily going to adopt those if they're not necessarily adopting even like an e-discovery platform.
Yeah, yeah. And then I wonder because I did see lately quite a few products being advertised to smaller law firms like voice assistants. So they talk to your
Mm-hmm.
clients on behalf of you. I find
Yes,
it quite dangerous.
it's interesting, right? And I think it depends on your practice. So, if you have a high volume personal injury practice, right? And this might be more of a US thing. So, I know you're based in the Netherlands and you don't have torts like we have in the US, right? Like in the US, there's a lot of high volume plaintiffs firms, high
Mm.
volume insurance defense firms that work for the insurance companies. So for the plaintiff's firms, personal injury, things of that nature, in some ways it does make sense, right?
Yeah.
That maybe there are maybe you don't necessarily want to spend money on a receptionist who maybe get inconsistent intake because of that, right? Depends if they're who's at the front desk or who's answering the calls if somebody's out sick or if somebody's on their lunch break, people get different experiences. Uh, and then I could see maybe there's a use case there for using the voice AI assistant. But it's going to be very different, from a big law firm that would never, ever, ever do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for a
Having the
smaller one where you have high volume and you have people calling in all the time, maybe it does make sense to have a voice AI assistant as a first level pass.
Yeah. Yeah, we I had a little bit of experience with deciding on a large scale
Mm-hmm.
whether we're gonna go with the client facing
Mm-hmm.
AI solution or internal facing, and we decided for internal
Oh,
facing.
yeah.
No, it was not for voice, but it was for initial layer of customer communication when there was a
Interesting.
problem. So it was a financial institution. So it was high reputational risk if
Mm-hmm.
bot would only to one person say something that is not factually correct. And yeah,
Yeah.
being a huge enterprise, they had so much processes, documentation, so many products, so many services that the volume of the data that the bot would have to take into consideration was huge. Therefore, the risk was big. But speaking of those, how do you see, you also have a venture in evaluating LLMs through
Yes.
frameworks. And then how do you see those products that, let's say, that if we could categorize legal tech AI products in two buckets. One is directly facing the customers, the clients, and one is
Mm-hmm.
more internal. So how do you see the importance of evaluations for each of them? Is it kind of the same? Do you see any differences? And do you think that at some
Yeah.
point,
So I would say evaluations in general are always going to be important, right? I think that that applies to LLMs. I'm looking to expand this to machine learning, other AI that comes out, things like that, because you can't judge what you can't evaluate, right? So you don't know if something's working the way you think it's going to work, especially if you're looking at a non-deterministic tool like an LLM. That the idea, especially, the hot new thing is like AI agents, right? Especially if you want the LLMs to act autonomously within these certain parameters. You need to be able to evaluate whether or not they can actually do what you want them to do, or if they're doing what you say they're going to do. And so with client facing, obviously there's a lot of risk there, especially in the legal sector. There's reputational risk, as you discussed. There's also potential ethical considerations, right? You don't want something that's client facing to say something that's factually incorrect
Mhm.
that could get the attorneys in trouble,
Air
professional
Canada?
responsibility trouble, ethical trouble. Yeah, you don't want them to get in their own legal trouble because they said something they shouldn't. And then on the flip side of that, right, for internal use, you need that evaluation framework still if it's agentic, but you also need that if it's anything related to client work as well. So even if something's not technically client facing, if you're using it to produce a attorney work product, you still need to know if it's does what you think it does. Right. So like a
Yeah.
perfect example of this is all the hallucinated citations we're seeing right now in legal documents, right? From using LLMs for legal research. And it's one of those things where it's like, yes, you should always check your citations. And this was something that, I think depends on what the hallucination is. So sometimes it's like, okay, this citation just doesn't exist. Completely made it up. Or it's you ran your work product to make it to smooth it out, smooth out any of the rough edges, make it sound better. And the LLM changed the citations, even though you had already checked it.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you do the research or maybe the citations are correct, but it doesn't actually say the arguments you think it says. And that's something that happened pre-LLM, right? That people did their legal research. Maybe they just read the little head notes in Lexis or Westlaw, assumed it confirmed your argument when maybe it said the complete opposite thing. And that's something that was happening before anyway. But those are examples where you still you need those evaluations so you know, okay, this product actually works the way I think it's going to work. Because attorneys especially are very used to deterministic products because that's how they work, right? So traditional legal tools, I'll go back to legal research. If I do a Boolean search in a traditional legal research tool, I will get the same answer back every time.
Yeah.
If I put the same prompt into an LLM, I'm not necessarily getting the same answer back every time. Yeah, and lawyers don't think that way. Lawyers think, okay, if I'm looking for X and I put in Y, I'll get X. But with an LLM, if you're looking for X and you put in Y, you might get, X, Y, Z.
Yeah, or B.
Or B, exactly, or B.
Yeah. Very interesting. And there was a paper out just recently, a research paper from OpenAI explaining what are hallucinations. And they're not a side effect. They're literally just the mechanism behind how LLMs produce words. Literally everything they do can be said is a hallucination because they don't have this fact-checking mechanism in the way they think and work. They kind of predict what the next word is supposed to be based on generalized data that they were trained on. And the data is the whole internet. Yes, it's very probabilistic.
It's probabilistic. Yeah. It's not deterministic. It's not, it's definitely a different, it's different than ways we think about knowledge acquisition, right? If I go to Wikipedia and I look something up, if I want to look up the US Constitution, right? I go to Wikipedia, I'm going to get the entry. If I look up the US Constitution, maybe I get stuff about the Constitution in the US, maybe I get it about a US state, maybe I get it about something else.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be the same every time. And that paper is very interesting too, because it talks about how hallucinations are also a function of how LLMs are trained.
How we benchmark them. Yeah.
Yeah. Benchmark them, how they're trained, that they're trained not to just say, sorry, I don't know. Yeah. Which is very, very interesting when we think about, sometimes people are like, oh, you should look at LLMs as a junior employee, as like an intern or things like that. And the very valuable skill of being able to tell somebody, I don't know the answer, is something that LLM cannot do. But it's interesting that is one of the causes of hallucinations, or that's the way OpenAI, whereas I think what you're saying is probably closer to what it is, because
it's
predicting something. It's probabilistic. It's not ever going to be. It's not the same like way we consider. We look at deterministic ways of retrieving knowledge, right? So
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I think that it's kind of probably more things. There were so many researchers, but they were looking at different angles and aspects of hallucinations and then trying to connect them to these huge, complex neural networks that are basically brains of those AI models. So they're trying to connect a few dots, but I think those are two the most that make the most sense and that are repeating themselves more and more throughout these researches, which is basically as that the benchmarking system kind of forces LLMs to kind of come up with an answer, because if you have a wild guess, there is 1% of chance you're going to be right. But if you say, I don't know, there is 0% chance you're going to be right. So you're not going to do well on tests. So I find it quite,
Exactly.
yeah. So I find it
And
quite
that's
interesting that OpenAI is admitting this openly, because what they're saying is we're making our models work so they pass tests. That has nothing
I
to do
know, and
with
that's kind
being
of the
intelligent.
bad. So that's the issue I think sometimes around benchmarking, right? Where I don't really know the value of seeing, uh, how well they can do like specific math problems or how well they answer very specific legal questions, right? So when you benchmark in that way, as you said, it's kind of teaching to the test. And, I
Yeah,
think back to when I was in school, in the US, we have a lot of standardized tests we have to take, and that's what the schools get graded on and things like that. And so teachers were very focused on teaching specifically to what would be on that test and not necessarily teaching, how to use that knowledge otherwise. And so that's why I think when evaluating LLMs, it's really important to look at it in the terms of a framework that you can then apply different data sets to or different questions to within said framework.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
from there, it's really hard to quote unquote teach to the test
yeah.
because it's a framework.
It's
And
your test.
ideally, with a framework, that the better it gets at answering questions within that framework, that's good because
Yeah,
then it's actually meeting the framework. So,
yes. And the framework should definitely reflect your way of working, not the general benchmark,
exactly.
right? So that's the point of it. But it's also interesting. I think that also with raising awareness around LLMs, AI's limitations, and where are they coming from, and that they're not going away anytime soon. I saw a lot of posts on LinkedIn. Hey, if you prompt this right, you're gonna yeah, what is it? Solve the problem of hallucinations. That's not how it works.
Yeah, that's not
Hallucinations
really
are
how it
like,
works.
I mean, either LLMs are going to not produce anything or they're going to hallucinate, because there is no there is no 100% accuracy. Like how many,
Yeah.
it's
You can't
impossible.
have 100% accuracy with a probabilistic system. It's just,
Yeah, and I
it's
mean, like
literally impossible to do that. And to your point,
yeah,
if everything they do is probabilistic, then they're not necessarily going to say, I don't know, because there's always going to be that 1% chance they're right.
yeah, true, true. And there are some
Yeah.
answered questions that are inherently unanswerable, some more philosophical ones, and how are you going to evaluate accuracy on those? But like one thing that I also would like to mention, because I do feel like, especially now that we're talking about this, you reminded me of it, but like, how does this AI search work in the background? So like when you're searching in those LexisNet, when you're searching in LexisNexis, when you're searching for a specific keyword for a case study, right, or a citation, so you would, and I'm going to simplify it a lot here, you would search for cat. You would find all the cases that have mentioned the word cat. You can
Mm-hmm.
even define whether it should be in the title, it should be wherever you're searching for, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
if you want to do just cat in paren, ideally
Yeah.
meaning,
Yeah.
a the animal cat, or if you want to do cat star, right?
Yeah.
With the
So cat with
asterisks, if you
everything
want
else.
anything with
Yeah.
cat, so categorization, category, cat, anything
Yeah.
with that
Yeah,
prefix
so that works and
to be
works
very
extremely fast.
specific.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very specific. You will catch all the matches, all of them, and it will be 100% correct. So you will run it 100 times. It will find the same ones, all of them 100% of the times, right? So how an LLM works is they don't search for cat. Where does the cat match? The whole search with LLMs is not like it doesn't think in words. It thinks in tokens. It thinks in embeddings, vectors.
Yeah.
So every character is translated into vectors. So C becomes 0.0011444557777. A becomes 0.7999852. So then in the vector space, when you search for cat, the vector is close to the vector of kitty, so it will fetch both. So it knows that the cat and the kitty are similar and they have the same meaning because they're close. So it's mathematics. So, but cat is also similar to catastrophe. So if the
Hmm.
search parameters are wide enough, it's going to also pull catastrophe in the mix. So now let's put this on finding citations,
Yeah.
right? So like you should really double check everything that comes out of
Yeah,
the
exactly.
LLM.
And even, for that, right? If you're just using that for search, maybe you're missing stuff too. It's not even just
Yeah,
like, oh, I get catastrophe when I'm looking for cat,
but I'm
but
missing
maybe
something
I
else that
missed
is
out
important.
all of this information on the physiology of cats that I was
Yeah,
interested in.
yeah, true. Because semantically they were not kind of in the same space. It was more far away. So it's very interesting, and I think that like I don't think that the way to go about it. And now I'm just kind of saying what I think, but um, I don't think that we should be thinking that the hallucinations are ever going to go away. I don't think we should be finding our ways to work around them because we are preventing
Yes.
ourselves to get the benefits of the AI,
Yeah,
but
they're
the
benefits
benefits
to
are there.
like you want that creativity, right? So in
Yeah,
some way, LLMs are really, really helpful for legal work specifically, or other types of work where you want to test your biases, you want to test different
yeah,
arguments, you want to test different ideas. Like I use LLMs a lot for ideation, right?
yeah,
Where I already might have my ideas, I want to test them out, I want to see if there are other things I'm missing, or if there are other ways of looking at a problem or other suggestions. That's a great way of doing it because it is kind of some more free flowing and this non-deterministic way of looking at it. And I think a lot of the issues you see, right, when people are trying to use non-deterministic systems for deterministic work. And
yeah,
as you said, like hallucinations are here to stay, and either figuring out how to work around them, right? Like they're always going to be here. So figuring out evaluating, for instance, seeing how often it's there, and then figuring out other system integrations to work against that, right? So for instance, legal research, if you have hallucinations, maybe have a machine learning systems layer on there that you can check those citations against a database before presenting them as a result.
yeah, yeah,
Or there's this really cool product, Describe AI, for instance, it's a legal research tool. They use LLMs to collect all the information in their database at first and organize it. And then they do NLP to actually then retrieve it. So they're not
yeah,
doing any API or token calls, right? So
yeah,
they've already they did the initial work with LLMs and they pull cases as they come using that and putting it into the different categories that they needed to, but then the actual legal research isn't done by
yeah,
an LLM. You're not
yeah,
prompting, you're just doing a regular search.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think
and
those
that's
are the cool ways that
yeah.
you can use LLMs in those ways, is taking advantage of the non-deterministic way of working while putting in a deterministic workflow.
And if you're looking at the development in the industry, in legal tech over the past year, focused on AI tools, do you see them being the progress going more in that direction, like breaking things down, like more deterministically, as opposed to conversational ways?
I think it depends on the product. I think you're right. Like
Okay.
that first wave, and I don't want to say wrappers, but they are kind of wrappers, where they basically just using, putting a small layer, having like a big prompt, like an
Yeah, just a
involved
prompt
prompt
on
for
top. Yeah,
these, and calling it a product. Whereas a lot of the really cool, interesting products I'm seeing are using LLMs, but they're using it in service of the rest of the product.
yeah, right. Not
Yeah.
AI first so
Yeah,
much.
not AI first, though I think it goes back to our point before I was talking about where people are just want AI, AI, AI. But I think a lot of the interesting products out there on the market right now are the ones that are A, looking to solve a specific problem, and B, using the LLMs and using AI in a way to solve the problem, not necessarily just using AI and then figuring out a problem to solve later, almost, it
Yeah.
seems like. And I think those are the ones that are going to be the stickiest, because I think a lot of the issue is that you get a lot of these companies have a first mover advantage, and maybe a lot of, you know, firms and corporate legal departments have adopted these products because they were here and they're like, we want to use AI, and the sales cycle for these sales is getting faster and faster. But you're also getting shorter and shorter contracts. So before maybe you'd have, a 2-3 year contract. Now you're having a 1 year contract because people kind of want to
Okay.
try out and test these things. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start to see a lot more churn versus some of these more mature products that
Hmm.
are using LLMs as like in service to solving the problem. Because if
Yeah.
it's just there and it's not really solving your problem any better than, a generalized chat, like a general chat tool like ChatGPT or Cloud Sonnet or something, then people aren't going to use the product. Whereas something where they can't get from a generalized chat, then that I think those are the ones that are going to be sticky.
And how do you see the evaluation of the tools or businesses adopting evaluation frameworks following the adoption of the tools themselves?
Yeah, so I think it depends how they do it, right? So for instance, with my venture, the way our evaluation tools works is it's an evaluation embedded within the tech stack of the product itself, so that companies could say with confidence, hey, a third party evaluated our LLMs and our system. It works the way we're going to work it, like we say it works. Test out the product, like you can have confidence that it's going to do what we say it's going to do. And then there's other evaluation frameworks out there, which I think have their place as well and are cool, where you can set up your own evaluation for what you're looking for, which I think is what
Mm.
people should do anyway in any sort of a evaluation of a product. Like I always come at it from the business development side where I'm the one selling it. But whenever I've been on I'm it's interesting to me how different organizations evaluate products. A lot of times they just kind of kick it off to the users and say, "What do you think?"
Yeah. Reviews, surveys.
but
Yeah.
but having like a lot, it's interesting that in the market there seems to be an approach now to more systemized. Hey, you can look at it with your own individual use cases. Like, does this product do what you need it to do? Which I think, personalized individual evaluations make sense versus benchmarking to a degree. Like, it's great to look at a benchmark report, right? It gives you like a good basis and idea, but it doesn't really tell you much if it's comparing apples and oranges, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? If something says like this tool is 63% good redlining and this one's 77%, and it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah. What does that mean? What? Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. And how do you see, because there's like, I try to simplify it in my head and
Yeah.
then I kind of explain it in a way that you have to my clients that you have an evaluation within a context of a business environment, right? So does it make sense
Yes.
monetarily? Does
That
it
too,
actually,
right? And that's
right?
something you have to do on an individual business level, right?
But how do
All
you
of
do
like the
the,
evaluation tools I'm seeing on the market, it doesn't really evaluate it for your specific business.
yeah,
And that's a great point, right? Like, does it make sense for your business? And then I think goes back to the point before about AI in search of solving a problem. So you could
yeah,
spend a ton of money on AI if you want, right? But it's not always necessarily the most logical solution in a business context.
yeah,
Either it's not solving your problem in the way you want it to be solved, or maybe it does. Maybe you figure it out and it's able to solve it. But with token cost and development costs and things like that, it's actually might a lot of times be more expensive than figuring out another solution,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So we talked about the
yeah,
voice AI assistants before, right? Those could be a great solution, for instance, for high volume businesses, like a personal injury law firm or something like that. But what about a law firm that isn't personal injury or estate planning or something that's high volume? Maybe it's they have a low volume, they have they have like some set clients, they get like one or two new clients a month maybe or a year. Like they're not high volume. Having a voice assistant doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Or maybe even for the high volume firms, maybe it just makes sense to invest in training
Yeah, true.
for
But I
your
think,
for your people, right? Or makes sense to invest in automation tools, right?
yeah,
So maybe sometimes a lot of things I see like, oh, you can use an LLM for this. I'm like, you could just automate that in SharePoint before.
yeah, true. Yeah. 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 The other day
Like
I
that's
was,
something you could do. And to your point, if you have your data organized, you can do that.
yeah, true. Yeah. And you don't need an
Right.
LLM.
So I think it's like, I think that's the framework people need to evaluate new
Yeah.
tools in general with. But I don't know. I'm interested to hear your experience with this because you work a lot directly with law firms on AI implementations. Is that something they're looking at as well as like, what's the cost benefit analysis here of using AI for
Yeah.
solving this particular problem?
Not so much. I see a lot coming from what do I feel I need help for and what do I feel AI is good. So then
Yeah.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes they're kind of buying subscriptions for tools for things they do, as you said, twice a month. And yeah, it takes them an hour or 2 hours to do it, but then like you gotta weigh it against other bottlenecks that you have. And then you have to see, yes, here I'm gonna spend 30 seconds instead of 2 hours twice a month, but I'm spending 5 hours every week on this other thing, and I'm just letting it there. Or maybe sometimes, like, yeah, I have a lot of client calls. Not a lot of them convert to actual clients then, right? Like, okay, they're leads and prospects. They call me, but then we don't kind of go into engagement. And in this case might be attractive for the time saving and reducing the admin drag to automate this with a voice assistant, but you gotta be also aware of, okay, so if you're a smaller firm, lots of your relationships depend on that actual personal touch. So the clients don't really want to be hearing some correct but empty AI voice. Is gonna be explaining your services to them more or less in your way and more or less correctly. And also, when you kind of talk to a client, there's so much more behind that you can hear with your experiences of 30 years, 40 years talking to
Yeah.
clients, right? That the AI doesn't really get. So I think AI is pretty good, but when it comes to really, really nuanced things, you gotta weigh what is your client's tolerance for bullshit. Basically, if you want to go client
Yeah.
facing AI, this is also what you got to look at, right? Because sometimes 60% is good if you're a drop shipper and you want you're a drop shipper, you're living in Dubai and you have a e-commerce company, you don't care about your clients because you're selling hats for 2 euros a piece, right? So then you can do AI and it's okay if it's 60% correct. But when you have a small law firm where you have 10 to 20 clients and they're all very dependent on they're very connected to you personally, and there's like a lot of trust that is at stake here. I don't know. I think you gotta weigh it differently. And I'm not saying AI is not a solution there. I think it just has to be looked at differently. Yeah. More or less
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. Because yeah, if you have 10 to 12 clients, you can't really afford to lose any of those, right? The client
Yeah.
experience is different. Whereas high volume personal injury law firm where you're getting calls all day,
Yeah.
maybe it does make sense to have some degree of AI involved
Yeah.
in those initial client interactions.
Yeah, for sure. And also it does really depend, I think, on the jurisdiction as well, right? Because that's
That
kind
do.
of, yeah, Europe is
And cultural
pretty strict on that.
considerations.
Yeah. And
Right?
culture. Yeah, of
So
course.
something
Yeah.
that might fly in the US might not fly
Yeah.
in the Netherlands.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that the main takeaway here for anybody viewing this is just kind of look at your situation in an isolated manner. Look at your processes, look at your data, figure out where you want to be and take it from there. Don't look at the tools and jump into the
Yeah,
tools, right?
don't look. I think that's like a great takeaway is don't look at it as AI as a solution in and of itself. Look for a problem and try to find the best solution for it. And
Yeah.
sometimes that is AI, right? Or something
Yeah.
that's AI enabled or has AI in some part of the process. and other times it might be something else. And
Yeah.
we've had these conversations before, so I think you mentioned this before, where when starting an AI project, or you're saying to yourself, I got to use AI, and I
Yeah.
think people try to buy a bunch of things or buy a big platform, is find one thing to solve first,
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
on the adoption there, and go from there. Is
Yeah.
that something you found in your consultancy?
Yes. Early in the days when I started, I went really engineering heavy because that's what that was natural for me.
Hmm.
Every problem that I saw, I knew that there's a way to solve it in that way. But when you really step a few steps back and when you go through a lot of mistakes that are done 2, 3 months down the line because of this approach, I think that this is the only approach actually. I don't think that there's many different approaches when you go into implementing something strategical that
Yeah.
has to fit long run, right? Because none of us are in a business to go out of it tomorrow. So like, I think that's the only
Yeah.
approach. Like really find the bottlenecks, find them all, and then just kind of weigh them against one another, and figure out where do you want to be, and then see how can that, where is the bridge between that, where do you want to be, and all of the problems that you have right now,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
go into the tools from that point. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think exactly. And I think also, you run into issues then with adoption otherwise, right? I think
yes,
a controversial MIT report that came out saying,
oh yeah,
95% of AI implementations fail. And when you get into the report, it's because a lot of people just aren't, adapting to the specific tools. They don't work as well for them. Maybe they like a more generalized tool, things of that nature. And I think when you look at any sort of change management or any sort of change in workflow, it's really tough to do everything all at once. So
yeah,
finding that one specific pain point, that one issue where you're like, I could solve this problem. Here's the cost benefit analysis. Here's how much money it's going to cost. Here's how much money it's going to save you. Here's how much money it could potentially make you. And going from there and then building from there.
yeah. And that's I guess because the way you're talking about this, I guess this is also your experience where you work with firms, with tech firms.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so you
that's my
always kind of go in
experience too.
that.
And that's always so when anything like looking at go to market, it's you got to figure out your specific value proposition, which is, why buy this product? Why take the time to adopt, to spend the money, the opportunity cost, all of that? What is the value of what you're doing? And really trying to get down into the nitty gritty and the niche about it, about what you can solve in the process
Yeah,
to help
yeah,
to help people, right? And why they're going to buy it. So it's the
and
same thing, right? If you're doing the business development for it and the marketing for it, I mean, like getting in, okay, this is why you should buy it. This is the value of what we're offering you.
yeah.
It's the same as what you should be looking at in adoption, and that when the two meet, that's how you get a great partnership.
So that's exactly the thing, because how you're approaching this is very much from the business perspective. And I think that this is
Yes.
something that law firms don't have it under their skin so much, like the ops part of the business. I think it's mainly like
Yeah.
maybe last few years, this has started to become more and more of a topic with, yeah, the technology booming. Um, yeah, maybe for, I don't want to hold you up too much, but like maybe for
No.
like the one last insight into your brains, how
Yeah.
do you view that, how do you view that part of the problem?
The ops or the business or both?
Yeah, when did you see the awareness of operational side of running the law firm starting to become something that law firms were more and more aware of?
Yeah. So I think it's something law firms are always aware of to some degree, because law firms are very interesting in that they're not run necessarily like other businesses. Like obviously there's still a profit motive, they still have to be profitable. But law firms operate on a partnership level in most jurisdictions. You can't have non-lawyer ownership. So you have a number of partners getting together, pooling their profits so they can afford the overhead, the rent, the tech tools, the associates, paralegals, secretaries, all of that. And it's a very interesting model because it doesn't necessarily reward long-term thinking. Because if you're a partner, you want to make your money now, right? So a lot of times the partnership model, you have to pay out every year. It's not something, if you're a partner too, you can take your book of business and move to another law firm. So you're not necessarily looking to invest in the business long term if it isn't going to necessarily benefit you. And you see in some of the larger law firms, the really successful ones, you have the partners buy into this model where they give their management committee a lot of power to make decisions, to make long-term decisions, to make other decisions for the firm. And then you see other law firms that don't give their management committee as much power. Or you see in mid-sized firms or smaller boutique firms where there's less partners, uh, different models looking at that, right? Like where their motive is basically to make as much money as they can. And
Yeah.
some law firms, every partner at a certain level gets the same amount of money. Others, it depends on origination credit. Others, it's a black box trying to figure out compensation. So you have that motive there. And then the actual business of a law firm. Because of the partnership, it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to go do work with this law firm. I'm going to do work with this law firm. It's, I'm going to go do work with this partner who has a relationship with this company. And
Okay.
maybe that relationship partner has built up the relationship to the point where the company will do work with that law firm on a variety of different practice levels. Or maybe the relationship is just with that partner and the partner takes on those cases. And if the partner leaves that law firm, they can then take that with them as well. So you have a lot of lawyers basically running their own businesses within the confines of a law firm,
So,
right? And maybe they might work
yeah.
with another partner on it or things like that. So that's where I think it gets tricky figuring out how to sell to law firms sometimes, right? So if you have a law firm that has empowered a management community, or they have certain rules in place about technology implementation, you have to work with certain people. You still might not get buy-in from the actual users because it's really dependent upon which partner is doing it. Or if you have a practice dependent tool, if that practice isn't very powerful or makes a lot of money for the law firm, maybe the law firm isn't going to necessarily want to make that investment unless people in the practice group are very vocal about it. So it's just the economics behind the law firm. Like the law firms are very, I think, hyper aware of their business model. They just don't know any differently. And they have an incentive to keep it that way. So they do. But I think from this, it's interesting to see from the business side as more and more companies get into legal tech. You're seeing people who hadn't previously sold into law firms or legal tech doing it and not kind of understanding these little picadillos.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
very interesting because yeah, that's exactly what I'm hearing from a lot of partners that I talk to. Exactly what you're saying. Like a lot of tech guys coming in telling us how to do our business, but they don't understand our responsibility, our professional obligation, our day to day.
Yeah.
Where are we going next year, 5 years from now? How are we thinking about it? So that's, I think, a great lesson also for anyone that wants to start a legal tech startup and figure out how to sell to lawyers. It's very different. It's very different, and I'm pretty
Yeah, it's
fresh
very
in the
different
space,
because it's a
but I'm seeing
partnership.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's a partnership. It's not like selling to an
Yeah.
LLC, right? Like selling
Yeah.
to a Fortune 500 company is very different in a lot of ways than selling to an AmLaw 200 like
Yeah.
law firm.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Oh, very interesting. I also feel like maybe this is then the reason for the friction when you're talking about time savings and
Oh,
the
that part
billable
too.
model.
That's
Yeah,
very interesting. So the
right?
time savings and that's very interesting, right? So I'm sure everyone listening to this will know Lawyers make their money by billing by the hour, right? So they bill their time to specific clients, to specific projects. And it's very interesting, the law firm model or the billable hour model, because the amount of money you can make is restricted by the amount of hours you can work. So a lot of law firms have a 2,400 hour billable hour requirement, for instance, um, which, do the math, that might not sound like a lot, but it's a lot because it's
Ooh,
not
that's a
like
lot.
you're billing. Even like, so if you do, let's say you work a 9 to 5, which no lawyer works just 9 to 5, you're not necessarily billing just those 8 hours.
Mhm.
Is not all billable work. So like
Yeah,
an 8 hour billable day is closer to a
I
10
saw
to 11 hour
2.9.
workday.
Yeah, because
So when oh, go ahead.
I saw I read a research about this. Was it from LexisNexis even? And they were saying, and that was I think the last one that I found was from 224, and they were saying that an average lawyer bills 2.9 hours out of an 8-hour workday.
Yeah,
So
it
that
depends. It's very interesting because even if they're working on something or they're building something, maybe it's just doing business development for the firm or practice support, or maybe it's something called realization. So the number of hours you might bill versus the number of hours that are actually billed to the client. So you could still bill your time, but then the billing
yeah.
partner could go through, look at it, and be like, nope, nope, nope. Or the client could look through and say, I'm not paying for that, not paying for that. And so you have this tension where lawyers bill by the hour. So the idea, this promise with AI, oh, we're going to, like, you could do this faster, you could save time. Lawyers saying to themselves, like, well, that's how we make money, is by doing this faster. And I think some of those arguments, I think it depends. So I keep going back to eDiscovery. So before, with eDiscovery platforms, before it was you had to go through boxes and boxes of paper, right? And you have to have like an army of people to go through that and look through it and have little sticky notes and figure that out. And that obviously took a ton of time. Then they started having platforms and they're rudimentary, but you still have to have an army of people to review them, everything in there. And then the search technology got better. And then we had technology assisted review. And you'd sometimes still have to have an army of people to review, depending upon the size of the project. But attorneys who still bill by the hour were saying, yes, we could do technology assisted review because they just literally didn't have the time to do it if they had a time sensitive matter. So, for instance, in antitrust, if you're doing a has second request in the U.S. or you have a phase 2 investigation in the European Commission, you need to review a lot of documents about the merger very quickly in order to then get those documents to the regulatory agency. So you may not necessarily even have time to do it, right? Like if you need to do what you need to do for your client. So there's that where that professional responsibility comes into play, where they're like, okay, we'll use technology assisted review. And now we have generative review, right? Where people are doing prompting and then being able to do the first pass review that way. And it's like, yeah, they're not able to bill as much for that, but they have to get the project done and they literally there's literally not enough people to do the work. So it's interesting now then with AI coming in then for other practice areas outside of litigation where maybe they wasn't traditionally there, where it's like, oh, okay, we're going to save time. And I think sometimes the argument then is people are going to be able to spend time on more high value work. I don't know necessarily
Mhm.
what that means. Theoretically, that everything they should be doing is high value. But I think there is a kernel of truth to that because there's an infinite amount of legal work out there.
Mhm.
Like you won't talk to any lawyer who when you ask them like, oh, is there anything else you could have done with this? They will give you a list of things they could have done if they had the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they will find something else then to fill that with. And I think there's going to be a drive partially from their clients, kind of like so I was talking about earlier with realization, where you're going to start maybe seeing in billing guidelines, you're going to be seeing in direction from the clients like, hey, we want to make sure you're using the best tools for the job to make sure that you're doing this in an efficient manner.
Yeah. Okay, so you think that there's also a
And
push coming from the client
it could
side of
come from the
things for the
clients.
adoption? Yeah,
Yeah, and I know everyone talks about the death of the billable hour. I don't know. I mean, I could see a scenario where maybe a attorney start is able to actually charge more because they're more efficient and maybe they're not using additional attorneys, they're using less attorneys to do the work so they can charge
yeah,
more for the billable. Or law firms actually being able to determine the value of their work better, right? Like being able to really drill down there and being able to value price their work. Um, Things like that, right? So it's a long-winded
yeah,
way of saying that I don't necessarily know these AI companies with or just these legal tech companies saying like, oh, it saves you time without context about what that means. I don't
yeah,
necessarily know is like a winning argument. But
yeah,
it could be
yeah,
because if you say it will save time on these tasks that give you time to do these other tasks, or the ability to strengthen your relationship with your client, potentially charge more because you're charging at a
yeah,
value. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. Because the lawyers that I talk to that have smaller firms, they do a lot of admin stuff, a lot of office work. So
Mm-hmm.
AI is great for that, right? That's one thing. And then, but for the other thing, for literally going back and forth with AI. So basically, how I see them using conversational AI is not to reduce time, but to increase the quality of what they do.
Yeah.
So like they use it to play the devil's advocate. They use it
Mm-hmm.
to surface other approaches, other angles of how you could view the same thing, to give them more arguments, to give them counters. So I feel more of that, but then like the other AI that they're using, that they don't know that they're using a timekeeper, but the timekeeper is
Yeah.
running AI in behind, right? So that AI is great for office work. You don't have to talk to it, but it does the job and it captures those hours that you lost throughout the day, right? You
Yeah. I
forgot to
think
log a
like
meeting.
AI billable like software is awesome. Right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
being able to do that initial capture and then have the attorney check it over before submitting,
yeah,
amazing. As
yeah,
somebody who's like had to keep time before, it's a huge
yeah,
pain in the butt.
yeah, yeah. True, true. I can tell you when I left the enterprise and I started freelancing, and I had to all of a sudden start writing down my hours. Right, the first month I lost 30% of them because it
Because
wasn't
you
in
don't
my
know.
blood.
You're like,
Yeah,
oh, what's it? And then you're like, start second guessing. Even if
yeah,
you're doing it on a daily basis, you start second guessing, like, oh, did I spend an hour on this? Did I spend a half
yeah,
hour? Oh, that seems
yeah,
like it. And then you're like, that seems like I took too long on it. I'm gonna
yeah.
reduce
True,
it. Yeah,
true. And then you go
yeah.
through the calendar. That's the worst one. You go through the calendar
Oh
and you have
yeah.
a 30-minute meeting there that took 1 hour and a half. But then you write down 30 minutes because it's in the calendar
Because
and
you're
you
just looking
forgot.
at the calendar. You're not
Yeah.
looking at how long the actual meeting was. Or you're like, how long
Yeah.
was that?
Yeah. Yeah. So in that sense, I see them using for time saving things that they don't notice, they don't have to talk to, but when they have to spend
Yeah.
time on AI, they're using it more to make it to make their work better or to yeah, basically
Yeah,
to
just
to
like
improve the
freeing
quality.
up from admin work, right? Like I think
Yeah.
doing like these back office tasks is like an amazing use of AI.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the best thing ever for me.
Yeah, yeah,
It's the
right? It's
the
like
boring
that's what I
one.
want. Like I want AI to help me manage my calendar. I want AI to manage like to help measure my time for me. I want AI to help with some of my accounting and things like that. Like that's what I want.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't
true.
want AI to do my job for me. I want AI to do these other things for me.
Yeah, yeah, and that brings us to the most cliche point of them all, right? Because this is always what was like. I think I saw that post on LinkedIn more than any other one. I don't want my AI to do my I don't
Oh,
know,
it's like
but
I
I don't
don't want
want my
AI to like or something similar like I don't want AI to write poetry for me. I want AI to do my dishes.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
something
That's
like
the
that.
thing.
But it's
That's
like,
the
yeah,
thing.
that's
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
want. I
yeah,
want AI to do my other stuff. And
yeah.
then so I could focus on the stuff like that I know is my special sauce, the my
But
special skill and what I offer and bring to the table. And that's
and
why I
I
tell
love.
lawyers who are afraid AI is going to take their
Yeah,
job, where I'm like, no, 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 no. Like it's not going to necessarily take your job if you let it, right? Like you will
yeah,
still have something special to offer. And so it's going to allow you to focus on being able to offer that.
yeah. And that's why I like this cliche, because it's actually true.
Yeah.
And we've been saying it 2 years ago, but we're still forgetting on a daily
We're still
basis
forgetting it
about
because
it.
you see a lot of products that are like, hey, do you want us
Maybe.
to basically do your job for you?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the fear is. And I think some of the fear is justified because you see companies cut jobs because giving the excuse of AI, which I don't know if AI is necessarily the reason per se, but this idea of what AI could do, probably more related to earnings and other issues as well. But it's like a legitimate fear where it's like, oh, AI is going to take your job. It's like, well, if your job is taking data from one spreadsheet and putting it into another,
Then you're
maybe
in
you should
danger.
find
Yeah.
something else. Yeah. But if your job is involves more than that, then like I think you're gonna be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. True. True. Yeah. An interesting. I think we had a lot of interesting points in this one. This was great, Emma. Thank you so much
No, this was
for
so great,
this
Rock. Thank you so
introduction.
much for having
Yeah.
me.
That's a great note to end it on for today. Thanks a lot to Emma for joining. This was a super valuable conversation packed with insights. Thanks for watching, and if you like this, make sure to follow along. I'll be having my next conversation already next week. See you in the next episode.